Good evening and welcome to another edition of What This Record Means to Me. I got such positive feedback from the volume 1 that I did. I decided I would do another one, and coincidentally, although are there really coincidences? The one record that was on my mind all week since getting this great feedback, I'm going to feature today, especially today because it is September 7th. And today would have been Buddy Holly's 86th birthday. Now, we all know Buddy Holly unfortunately died in 1958, tragically, in the plane crash that took the lives of some amazing musicians from the 50s, the Big Bopper, Ritchie Valens, among them. Buddy Holly was only 22 years old at the time, and he already had a string of hits and was gaining, I'm sure, national fame and international fame. And it brings me to the thought about music, that the things that make it so important to us are the fact that it's healing, which is why that fateful day is termed the day the music died. Music heals, and it was just a heartbreaking, soul-crushing day to lose musicians who brought so much joy to the world. And when I listen to Buddy Holly's music, I can only imagine how exciting his shows must have been. So there's the healing aspect of music, and there's the connection aspect, and then the inspirational aspect. And, I'm going to touch on these topics a little bit while I talk about this record and why this record means so much to me and what this record means to me. And one of the things about music, or yet another thing, is that music is like traveling through time. You know, people say, hey, there should be a time machine, and if I had a time machine, this is where I would go, or, this is who I would meet. I do think music is like a time machine because it brings us back to cultural events, social events, expressions of the time, and it helps us understand them a little bit better and connect to times in history. It also helps us to connect to times in our own history. So let me tell you a little bit about the history of this record. Now, I think for the most part, I'll be featuring albums, but this 45 is incredibly special to me. When I was a kid, probably about 5 or 6 years old, I remember my brother and sister and I being down in my grandparents' basement and going through my mother and my uncle's old records. And of course, they were all records from the 50s. And I had this little portable Raggedy Ann record player. It was made out of all plastic, but it was great because I could take it anywhere I wanted. And so I happened to have it there, and we were listening to these 45s one after another. And this is the original Brunswick label, Buddy Holly. It just says the Crickets. That was his band. So it's nice that, they were featured on this. And anyway, when this record was played, that was it for me. I instantly fell in love with it. I brought it home. I brought some of the records home, but this was the one. And I played this nonstop, over and over and over again. So much so that I remember my babysitter saying, don't you have another record? And quite frankly, it was the only one I wanted to listen to. So, it brings me back to that time of being, I think I was, 5 or 6 years old, really. And this was it. So the other side is Tell Me How. And I would listen to that once in a while, but it didn't do it for me like Maybe Baby. And Maybe Baby essentially is a rockabilly song. And those jangly guitars, The drummer who actually hit those drums, you know, it was like in the 50s, a lot of stuff, they still used brushes, but he was banging on those drums, and Buddy was fiercely strumming his guitar in time with the drums. And I think that's where I got a lot of my love of playing to the drummer, was from Buddy Holly. Awesome, awesome songwriter. You could listen to the Buddy Holly Original Masters. There's 20 songs on it. It runs 44 minutes. Buddy Holly's music, each song was roughly about 2 minutes just over or just under. And he just said what he needed to say. And every song sounded different, you know, and I just loved that. They did have that common Buddy Holly twang, a little bit of country, little bit of rockabilly, little bit of rock and roll. It was all there. And you can just hear the influence throughout the decades that followed. If you listen to the Beatles, whose name was derived from knowing Buddy Holly had the Crickets, there it is. There's the influence. I was thinking about the Byrds and those jangly guitars. You know, this is where they got it. And then one of my other favorite bands, the Stray Cats, who brought rockabilly back in the 80s. I was lucky enough to see the Stray Cats a few times back in the 80s, and it was such an uplifting, fun concert. And to hear the Stray Cats do a song like Rave On or Oh Boy, or Looking for Somebody to Love, it just brought the 50s right back. Like I said, time travel from the 50s to the 80s, and it just sounded so present. That original sound and the fierceness of the drums and the guitar and that slapping bass. So that really did it for me. The other influence that Buddy Holly had on me was, of course, the Fender Stratocaster. This was my very first real guitar. My first electric was a Sears Les Paul copy, but I bought this when I was, after I graduated 8th grade. I saved up my paper route money and some of my graduation money, and this is a 1982 Fender Stratocaster, which I nicknamed Bo. And I love this guitar. I still love it. It's all stock original except for the string rests here, because my strings were snapping, so these are graphite rests. Everything else is stock, and it just sounds phenomenal. I play it through a Fender amp, but Buddy played it through a Magnatone amp, and it just has a perfect sound. There's no reason to alter it whatsoever, in my opinion. So this record actually has a full-on crack running straight through it, but nonetheless, I would just line it up and play the record anyway. I now have the song, of course, you know, on digital, but nothing is like vinyl. So here we have it. The very first song that just did it for me. Maybe Baby. Great backup vocals. Fierce instrumentation. My eyes, really, I do need readers. Beth is so right. So let's do this again. One more time. Why does this always happen? Oh, God. Ready? Happy birthday, Buddy Holly. I will see you on the other side. Thanks for tuning in.